In the dying light that falls across the Forum Romanum, the 12 tables are posted on bronze, so that law is no longer a secret tradition guarded by the few, but a rule of measure that any citizen can see. Ordinary people can learn what is right and wrong, and are less easily crushed when the powerful twist custom to their advantage. When disputes rise, over boundaries, written debts, or wills, litigation follows two turns. First before the magistrate, to define the quarrel and choose the proper formula, then in the hearing itself, where the appointed judge listens to witnesses and decides within that form. Alongside this, the jurists, the prudents, give answers on difficult points of law. Their responses slowly harden into standards that guide both officials and citizens. If you would follow Rome further, to watch law become daily habit, stay here and listen on to the parts that follow. From those bronze tablets posted in the Forum, the city's people learned that injustice must travel by the road of the court, not by the road of retaliation. The plaintiff summons the defendant into law. If the other tries to evade, a witness must first attest the refusal. Only then may the defendant be compelled before the magistrate. In that rule lies a larger meaning. A quarrel is drawn into the open, so speech must answer to the community. At the place of judgment, the matter is strained and ordered. Who speaks before whom, on what day, at what hour, with proof or without it. One who has accepted the role of witness cannot easily slip away from that name, for that name is a cord binding the private person to the public order. Rome offers no promise of a life without disturbance. It builds only a gate, so the heat of human passions must pass through form. And that gate, across many centuries, becomes the habit of everyday life. Once the gate of the court stood open, the law drove a stake into time itself, so that debt would not harden into hatred passed from one generation to the next. If a debt had been acknowledged, or the court had already ruled, the debtor was granted 30 days to find a way through, to sell off property, to seek help from friends, or to arrange repayment. Only when that term expired could the creditor bring the man before the magistrate, and only according to form. What matters most is not the severity, but the measure. Time is counted, and power is bound by conditions. The lender knows he may demand only in season. The debtor knows he still has a span in which to preserve his standing. The officials know when they must intervene. In this way, contracts carry the weight of speech spoken before the community. An empire does not endure on renown alone. It endures when even money must move within a rule. Roman law does not stop at the crossroads. It enters the threshold of the home, where the household is a small commonwealth. The 12 tables affirm that what the dead has fixed in a will, concerning property and guardianship, must be honored as binding form. And so a wax tablet, a tied cord, a seal, small things in the writer's hand, become heavy as stone for those who remain. When the father is absent, the orphan is not cast adrift. There is tutela, a guardian, and that title is tied to duty under public judgment. And when there is no will, the law turns to blood, calling the nearest kin to carry the house forward. The principle is plain. Wealth must have a resting place, and the right to care must have limits. Rome keeps order by forcing private life to stand upright before public law, a lesson later ages have never stopped relearning. Yet human life runs in 1,000 directions. No bronze tablets could contain it all. And so the praetor, whenever he entered office, issued an edictum, a public declaration of which actions would be heard in that year. Before the praetor, the matter was strained down to its true dispute. The formula was set like the wooden frame of a door. Fit it rightly and justice can pass through. Set it wrong, and every argument becomes only wind. That formula was then handed to the iudex, who heard witnesses, weighed words, and decided within the form already fixed. 2 stages, 2 beats, the beat of jurisdiction and the beat of judgment. Because the edictum was posted openly from the start, merchants and tenants, creditors and debtors could chart their way, avoiding what is forbidden, preparing what is required. Justice, by that discipline, becomes less like a sudden wave and more like the steady drumbeat of a polity that knows how to govern itself. Behind the praetor's edictum stands a quieter tier of intelligence, the prudents, the learned in law. Once, much of the state's legal knowledge lay in the hands of priests. In time, the jurists' answers, the responsa, became a lamp for anyone seeking the right path. Ordinary people came to ask how to frame a will, how to bind a contract, how to keep an oath from turning into falsehood. Officials came as well to know whether the court's door should open or close when a case arose that custom had never named. Over years, these answers settle like layers of silt, clarifying ius civil and building ius honorarium to fit the living world. This is a durable, quiet legacy, not statues, not triumphal arches, but the habit of revering reason. When a community learns to ask until it finds what is right, order does not need to shout. It holds itself steady in daily life. From the courthouse, we step into the market, where loud cries can drown conscience and trust can be weighed incorrectly. The aediles, guardians of streets and market order, posted their own edictum. Especially in the sale of livestock or slaves, the seller had to disclose serious diseases and material defects. If he concealed them, the buyer had 2 paths, either to rescind the sale and recover the price, or to demand a reduction worthy of the defect. Those Latin names strike like metal on metal, short, cold, but they prevent exchange from becoming deception. The subtlety here is that law does not demand perfection. It demands truth about what can harm another. When the seller's cry is bound to responsibility, the market endures, and when the market endures, the city can breathe long. Yet a quiet market is not enough. Order must travel, beyond the gates, along stone-laid roads. Rome's public roads were straight, durable, and marked by milestones, so distance was no longer mere guesswork. Along those routes, the state raised relay stations, the cursus publicus, so those carrying official business moved by rhythm, not by chance. There were places to change horses and keep speed, places to rest by night and keep strength, but not everyone could use them. A diploma or written permit was required because the relay was the bloodstream of rule. By that cadence, orders from Rome could reach a provincial capital before rumor hardened into crisis. Tax registers, military provisions, official reports, everything moved over stone, within form. A wide empire does not live on praise. It lives on routes that are guarded, and on messengers who travel by the right station, the right term, the right law. But roads only guide people. Water sustains a city. Aqueducts carried distant springs to Rome, into public fountains, baths and basins, then drew the flow down into drains, so streets would not choke on foulness. Where water runs, someone will try to draw it off for himself. Frontinus, charged with the city's waters, described the tricks, piercing the conduits, inserting unlawful pipes, or secretly using wider pipes than the allotment allowed. For that reason, lead pipes often bore stamped names, a warning that this current belonged to the public. Here law does what seems humble. It protects the arteries from being carved up, keeps outlets from being blocked, so the city does not rot from its foundations. A city may raise high temples, but if water is stolen and drains are choked, its glory dies inside ordinary life. Rome chose to guard the flow, so that order could have a body. When law had touched earth, market, and water, Rome sought to bind time itself to form. Caesar reformed the calendar, a year of 365 days, with an added day every fourth year, so seasons and festivals would no longer slip out of rhythm. With a calendar fixed, deadlines gained an anchor, and promises gained weight. By the same spirit, in the camp, disciplina tightened the will. The soldiers swore the sacramentum, then learned to step in measure, to stand in measure, and when needed, to form the testudo, shields closed in front, shields roofed overhead, the whole line like a single shelter. In the forum, legal procedure taught people to leave private vengeance and seek the court. In the camp, military discipline taught each man to place himself beneath the line. Two places, one idea. Order is not only written in words. Order is a habit forged over days and years, until it becomes the legacy of an empire. After time had been bound to the calendar, and will have been bound to discipline, Rome laid the same spirit into lime, stone, and volcanic ash. Opus cementitium, their concrete, was not made to flaunt a secret, but to produce strength that could be repeated. Slaked lime met pozzolana and rough aggregate, and became a binder that could set even in damp places, letting harbors, seawalls, and foundations stand firm against water. From that point, barrel vaults and domes no longer depended on colossal blocks alone. Builders could cast the curve itself, so the weight above flowed outward and down into the piers. Each arch is a lesson in the discipline of matter. Accept compression, avoid tension, and stand by geometry. But good material is not enough. Great works require an art of public management. In Rome, raising roads, repairing drains, and renewing temples was not only craft, it was also accounts and responsibility. Censors could let public works by contract, setting terms, fixing deadlines, and binding contractors by reputation and penalty. When terms are clear, the builder knows what must be delivered. When the deadline is clear, the people know when the work must be finished. When responsibility is clear, power grows less arbitrary. It is a tradition close to a republican temper. The public treasury is not private property, and public work must have a name attached to it. By that mechanism, concrete and vaulting spread, not by luck, but because form existed to turn promises into stone. From the vaults of grand construction, we step into the warm, bright space of ordinary life, the baths. There, Romans did not only wash, they learned to live by routine. Beneath the floor, the hypocaust lifted the pavement on small brick piers, so heat from the prefernium could run through the hollow space, warming the floor and, in some places, the walls as well. That comfort demanded quiet discipline. Fuel must be ready, the fire tender must keep his hours, and water must arrive steadily. And when Frontinus spoke of illicit pipes hidden within the city's system, he was reminding everyone that comfort survives only when the public flow is kept within law. In the warmth of the bathhouse, a lasting idea becomes visible. Order is not self-born. It is maintained by organization, and organization needs law as its base. If water can come, then water must also have a way to leave. Otherwise, the city turns itself into stagnant ground. Rome therefore tended the low side of glory, sewers, streets, and the cleanliness of shared space. The aediles carried cura urbis on their shoulders, overseeing roads, drains, markets, and the practical duties that keep communal life from sliding into disorder. They supervised repairs, compelled cleaning, and kept passageways from being seized or fouled. It sounds like daily life, and precisely there, order becomes habit. Each person learns that the neglect of one household can weaken an entire neighborhood. Rome did not only raise monuments, it raised a way of living. And that way begins by sending refuse and wastewater down the right channels, just as disputes must travel by the right court. When the city had clean water and warm floors, the state looked outward to mountains and forests, where mineral veins fed the treasury. Among the revenues of the state, mines carried heavy weight, because metal is the lifeblood of coin and war expense. In Hispania, the landscape of Las Medulas still bears the mark of arena montium, the wrecking of mountains, a method of gold extraction associated with Pliny. Miners drove tunnels, forced water in, and let pressure shatter rock, washing or down like a flood. Behind the spectacle stood organization. Water had to be brought from far away, labor had to be coordinated, and the yield had to be gathered and delivered by rule. An empire does not last only by conquest. It lasts when it can turn distant ground into steady resources, then bring those resources inward by routes and records. Out of the mountain comes metal. Out of the furnace comes a measure of trust, coin. Under Augustus, minting was tightened into a stable order. The gold aurea set by a weight standard, the silver denarius by a fixed proportion, and then the base metal issues serving everyday exchange. When a coin passed through the hands of soldier and merchant, it carried the state's pledge. The weight is right, the value is recognized, and the counterfeiter is treated as an insult to legitimacy. This is law in a form that can rest in the palm. A durable government must make taxation, pay, and commerce measurable without endless quarrel. In Rome, the standard of metal ran straight into the discipline of authority, and ran back again into the order of daily life. Yet order does not live only in gold and silver. It also sits in the bowl on the dinner table. Terra sigillata, bright red, glossy pottery, was made in molds, produced at scale, and carried along the roads into far provinces. On the underside of many pieces stood a stamped mark of workshop or potter, like a small signature. Who made it? Who carries the burden of praise or blame? At centers such as La Graf sink, fired lists and tallies tied to kiln loads reveal a steady rhythm of production and a habit of control. When objects become consistent, trade grows less uncertain. When uncertainty lessens, the courts are pulled less often into small disputes. Many people in later ages learned to treat a maker's name as a promise. Rome, with clay and fire, learned early to make that promise visible. From red gloss clay, we meet something clear as light on water, glass. Glass blowing rose from the Syro-Palestinian coast in the early 1st century BCE and traveled into Italy with craftsmen, opening a new age. Bottles, cups, and flasks could be shaped faster, in greater variety, and placed into more hands. Transparent containers help measure and preserve oil, wine, perfumes, medicines, goods of market and home. When wares are held in vessels with known mouths, stable forms, and roughly consistent capacities, bargaining becomes less fog-bound. And when fog thins, the order of exchange grows stronger. Rome did not only make beautiful objects, it fashioned the predictability of daily life, so a wide realm could still function with the steadiness of a well-governed city. From market and household we return to the camp, where discipline must be joined to care. Archaeological traces suggest that some forts contained buildings identified as valetudinaria, treatment quarters with small rooms set along corridors around open courts, hinting at organized patterns of care. In certain places, groups of medical instruments have been found within such areas, as if left by hands long practiced. Even when written sources do not speak plainly, the repeated floor plans and recurring finds lead many scholars to see this as part of military administration, keeping soldiers fit to return to the line. This, too, is law in a wider sense. If the state demands the oath, the state must also raise a shelter when the body is worn down. In lamplight within the camp, order takes on the outline of compassion. The instruments left in the earth speak in the language of precision. Forceps, probes, small blades, needles, tiny objects that require a steady hand and an alert mind. Archaeology shows they do not always appear as scattered fragments. At times they gather as sets, alongside structures understood as places of treatment. That is a reminder that Romans respected procedure. Each step, each tool, each movement had its proper place, just as in litigation, where a small deviation can change the outcome. From judgment to healing, the same spirit is at work. Reliance on evidence, reliance on technique, and restraint of impulse. Their legacy is therefore not only stone, it is a collective habit, doing things in order and accepting limits. When that habit spreads beyond the camp, daily life grows less chaotic, and legal order becomes a way of living. When the hands of the army physician have grown familiar with the precision of a small blade and a pair of forceps, the life of the marketplace demands another discipline, the discipline of weights and measures. Romans understood that exchange cannot rest only on a glance and an oath. It needs shared standards to lessen suspicion. Grain is measured by the modius. Heavy goods are weighed by the libra. Units repeated so often that bargaining gains a firm footing, and fairness takes a visible shape. Order, therefore, is not confined to the court. It stands on the wooden counter itself, where seller and buyer bend over the same measure. When life can be measured, disputes are more easily refined into clear questions. And once the question is clear, justice need not grope through fog. From the measuring bin of the market, we enter the task of feeding a vast city. Grain must arrive steadily, warehouses must hold fast, and prices must never be allowed to become panic. At Ostia and Portus, the Ria, great storehouses are not merely brick walls filled with wheat. They are places where power learns to work with matter, weighing, measuring, recording, sealing, and moving goods onward in rhythm. The grain ships, especially along the Egyptian route, are not simply commerce. They are the city's lifeline, and that lifeline requires organized hands so it does not break. Order here has the scent of dry grain, the sound of sacks sliding over timber, and the stern quiet of ledgers, an unspoken right that keeps streets from swaying with hunger. Yet for grain to arrive in season, the sea must be tamed by works and by rule. Claudius raised a deep-water harbor on the ground of Ostia. Trajan added the hexagonal basin at Portus, completing a complex able to receive great fleets and direct transfer more safely. Around the quays stand warehouses, controlled entrances and exits, and an operating cadence that makes the flow of goods predictable. Ships arrive, cargo descends, cargo enters storage, then follows the river inland. This is logistics as a kind of legal order, less showy than monuments. Yet without it, the city would tremble at the edge of scarcity. And in the breakwaters, basins, and canals, one recognizes the same mind that shaped concrete and vaults, turning risk into procedure, turning confusion into rhythm. When bread has found its road into the city, land itself requires a straight line to be divided, possessed, and named before the law. The surveyor carries the groma, an instrument for right angles, a wooden cross with plumb lines, so that straight axes can be drawn across the landscape. From those axes, a grid of fields can be set, boundaries are marked, paths are traced, parcels are entered into records. The deeper meaning lies not in the technique of the angle, but its legal consequence. Memory and force yield, little by little, to evidence and boundary stones. When boundaries are clear, taxation grows less vague. When taxation grows less vague, resentment finds fewer places to ignite. Once again, order is nailed into the earth, not by rhetoric, but by straight lines. And once boundaries have their markers, disputes seek the place where judgment is spoken aloud. In the Forum, the basilica is a roofed great hall, a place for trade, a place for assembly, and also a place for hearings, so justice is not cut short by rain and wind. In Rome, the Basilica Julia stands within public space and declares a hard but necessary principle. Law must be visible, and judgment must occur under the eyes of the community. A passerby can hear argument, see the figure of the magistrate, and understand that conflict is not permitted to drift without end. The architecture here is not only stone and columns. It is a reminder of closure, a place to speak, a place to listen, and a place to set the final point to discord, so the city is not worn away by quarrels with no exit. Yet some matters cannot be allowed to dissolve into the city's ordinary rhythm, abuse of office and extraction in distant provinces. Thus at Rome appeared the quaestio repetundum, a standing court to hear accusations against commanders and governors after their term, and when warranted, to compel the return of illicit gains. The point to remember is that this step did not instantly weaken office while it was held. Yet it still marked a boundary. Power does not vanish into the darkness of distance and time. Once a door of inquiry exists, the provinces are no longer wholly mute. Officials know that after the applause of authority, there may still come a summons to return and answer before the common rule. The empire stands not only by conquest, but by the capacity for self-scrutiny, slow, imperfect, yet real. A system of judgment endures only when it respects time, time in the working day, and time in speech. Romans read the hour by the sun's shadow, and counted rhythm by water. The clepsydra, the water clock, drips into a marked vessel, making time something that can be heard and counted. It serves not only daily life. It is used to limit courtroom oratory, so one voice cannot swallow an entire hearing. Imagine the hall falling still, with only the steady drops like an unseen gavel, a reminder that justice needs reason, but it also needs form. When time is measured, argument is less likely to slide into the endless, and when argument is less endless, fairness has room to appear, not by impulse, but by limits that are honored. Measuring time is not enough. The state must also hold time through records. The Tabularium, Rome's archive, keeps documents and administrative traces. It stands beside the Forum like a stone memory, looking down on the place where law is spoken. Nearby, the Aerarium, the treasury, linked with the temple of Saturn and adjacent storage, holds the management of receipts and expenditures, and gives a resting place for ledgers and laws engraved on bronze. Without recorded memory, law is only a passing sound. Therefore, clerks and scribes become the silent apparatus, copying, keeping accounts, comparing texts, so decisions do not dissolve with the person who uttered them. A legal order lives by the ability to return to the document, to face the trace, and to ask, what was decreed, and who must answer for it? From a state's records, we reach a question that decides a life. Who is protected by law as a citizen? Civitas is not merely a name. It is the key to legal standing, one's posture before the court, one's rights in contract, and one's place within the common order. Across the realm, Rome organizes municipia and establishes colonies. Each community is drawn into the orbit of Roman rule, with obligations and privileges bound together. The widening of citizenship over time does not come all at once. It often arrives by service, merit, and the designs of authority. Here law reveals its most enduring strength. It turns attachment into something that can be named, recorded, and enforced, so loyalty is not only feeling, but a status with shape. Now the picture stands clearer, from Modius and Libra on the market counter, to the Huria at Ostia and Portus, from the straight lines of the Groma across fields, to the Basilica Hall where complaints are heard, from the water drops of the clepsydra, to the Tabularium and the Aerarium where texts are stored, and onward to Civitas and the community forms drawn into the orbit of a shared rule. All of it says one thing: Rome made life predictable, so people need not live by suspicion and sudden heat. Stone may wear, names may fade, but the habit of honoring standards, procedure, and records, forcing power to answer before law, remains the most durable legacy. And standing among ruins, what echoes is not the noise of victory, but the quiet cadence of order. Yet the court in the city and the provincial tribunal could still reach dead ends, for local power was not always clean. Then people sought another path, petitions sent upward to the highest authority. From wax tablets and rolled sheets, the lowly set out their wrongs, asking to be heard, asking for guidance in the rule. This culture of petition was more than procedure. It was faith that power above could reply, and that the reply could bind. When the answering letter returned, it became a standard for local officials to carry out, and a handhold for ordinary people to cling to. In this way, the empire formed a habit. When justice nearby was blocked, there remained a road upward to find a way through, a bridge of words thrown across distance. Gradually, that bridge was strengthened with writing and with set patterns. Under Hadrian, the praetor's edict, once renewed and reshaped year by year, was revised by Salvius Julianus and fixed as the edictum perpetuum, so actions and defenses no longer depended upon the personal bent of each office holder. At the same time, the system of rescripts, legal replies, expanded, allowing people in distant provinces to receive a ruling and carry it back as a standard. Here law is no longer only tradition. It becomes a text that can be copied, cited, and compared. When form is stabilized, daily life becomes less a wager against unpredictability. Contracts are easier to foresee, disputes easier to shape, and order more likely to endure. We see this most clearly on the frontier, where Rome is far away, yet law is still present. At Vindolanda, wooden writing tablets still preserve documents, contracts, loan notes, divisions of goods, everyday promises. They lack the splendor of stone columns, yet they are living proof. Soldiers and traders still used writing to bind a word, still sought form to avoid quarrel. When a document is folded, sealed, and passed hand to hand, that is the moment when order can be held in the palm. And because papers could travel with the army, law traveled too, not as a slogan, but as the habit of signing, calling witnesses, and keeping copies. Thus the empire expanded not only by roads and forts, but by a quiet legal way of life. But that way of life changed deeply when legal status changed. In the year 212, Caracalla's Constitutio Antoniniana granted citizenship to nearly all free persons in the empire. The status once rare became widespread, bringing with it access to Roman forms of litigation and contract, and also new obligations. From city corner to distant village, people suddenly stood closer to the same body of rule, even while speech and custom remained diverse. Yet this unity was not only a gift, it also widened the reach of taxation and duties. Law here becomes a wide cloak. It protects more, but also binds more, so that a broad realm can be fastened to a shared idea of standing and responsibility. Looking back, from the 12 tables in the Forum to the wooden tablets at Vindolanda, from the water drops of the clepsydra to texts stored in the archive, we understand that Rome built order the way one builds a work of stone. Writing is the foundation, procedure is the frame, records are the supporting columns, and the habit of citing law is the roof over common life. Ruins may fall silent, yet behind them stands a world of documents, witnesses, deadlines, and judgments, a world that pulls people back from the sheer tug of anger. The great question, then, is not only how Rome conquered, but how it bound power into form. Its legacy is not in monuments, but in a cast of mind. Justice must have a road, and that road must be visible.